What's going on, everyone? Today we are going to talk about bailouts, as it is a hot topic in the news, and we're going to talk about what bailouts mean for you and how they actually work. So with the current situation that we're in, the government is considering doing a huge stimulus package to boost the economy and help some travel and leisure companies, as well as some airlines, to help stay afloat in this turbulent economic situation. What does it mean to have a bailout? How does it actually work? How is it going to help boost the economy, and what does it mean for you? That's what we're going to talk about here. But before we get started, don't forget to like, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and that little bell. It helps a lot. And now let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why some people think that bailouts are needed right now. And before we even get there, this is not a political discussion. I'm not going to talk about the different politics of either side, but this is more of just an economic discussion about what a bailout is, how it works, and how it can affect you as a taxpayer and also companies and those people that are involved. Now, the history of the word bailout actually comes from the maritime industry when ships were sinking and you had to literally bail the water out of the ship to keep it afloat. So it's really similar in these times when companies are practically sinking financially and you have to bail them out to keep them afloat and to help them to survive. Specifically, we're going to be talking about a few different companies that are in talks of getting a bailout right now. That includes Delta, United Airlines, American Airlines, Boeing, and a lot of other travel and tourism operators. Now, a lot of these travel and tourism operators are getting hit hard because their revenue has pretty much been slashed by 50 to 95% because a lot of the travel restrictions that are going on because of the coronavirus outbreak. This means that over time, they're going to have less and less money to actually pay their bills. So a lot of the money that they had saved up is actually just going to have to be used to pay off expenses and pay off their creditors. So in this time of the quarantine era, when they actually can't make profit, all that cash is going to go away very quickly because they're not able to make revenue, they're not able to make profits, and here they are burning up cash really quickly. So you can prepare for this. Companies can save up money and just be ready for these types of situations. But in something like this, it's relatively unprecedented when up to like 95% of your revenue, or even for some companies, 100% of your revenue is just cut off overnight because people are quarantined and they can't use certain industries anymore. Boeing is in a slightly different position because they're still dealing with the fallout of the 737 MAX. But now that airlines are saving so much money and they're not able to make a profit, they're actually putting off purchases of new airplanes. At some point in the future, if these companies aren't able to generate more revenue and get more profits to pay off some of their expenses, they're either going to have to get a cash injection or they're going to have to lay off thousands and thousands of employees and potentially go bankrupt and then potentially fail. Now, with most small, medium, and even large businesses, if they were in this situation, they would pretty much just have to close their doors, go bankrupt, and that's the end of the business. They don't get any types of bailouts. But with these giant businesses, the idea is that with a bailout, they're actually not just saving this one company, but they're saving a lot of other economic turmoil that could happen. Because if one of these companies is basically relied on by 10 other companies, let's say as an example, then when this one company goes out of business, these 10 start to get into financial issues. And then when those 10 potentially go out of business, others underneath them are going to go out of business. And then you have this ripple effect of failure, 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 failure. And then it creates quite a bit of economic turmoil. So that's massive unemployment, massive economic turmoil, and just not good things all around for everyone involved. So how do we save these businesses then? Well, that's where a bailout comes in. And a bailout is basically a cash injection of some form that allows these companies to stay afloat long enough to then recuperate, get more revenue, get more profits, pay off their expenses, and get back to being business as usual. But it's not really free money, and it could actually be you that's paying the price as the taxpayer. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. A bailout can take a few different forms and can be led by a couple different entities. It can either be led by a high net worth individual, a company, or in many cases, it's also a government. In the case of the coronavirus bailouts, in the case of the coronavirus bailout, the government is actually going to give money in a couple different ways. One is low interest loans, another is offering subsidies, and another is where they can either buy a company, all of it or some of it, at really low prices. And that's the one we're going to specifically talk about here. So we're going to focus on that last one, buying all or some of a company at really low prices. And why do you as a taxpayer have some sort of effect on that? So let's take Boeing as an example. Overall, Boeing has always been a financial fortress and one of the most stable and financially sound companies of all time. However, in the past 2 years, they've run into the crisis with the 737 MAX, and now they're running into the separate crisis that's piling it on of the coronavirus bailouts, the travel industry being affected, and now these airlines putting off different payments and different purchases that they might make to Boeing for new planes. So all of that is compounding into some financial stress that's being put on Boeing. And the stock has actually decreased by 75% from about $450 down to $95 in just the past year. It's on the brink of some major financial stress, so the government might actually have to step in and do some cash injections to avoid massive layoffs and also the potential bankruptcy of the company as a whole. So Boeing has actually asked the government for $60 billion to help in this, to keep them afloat and to make sure the business can be maintained for the long run. So if the government bails out Boeing, they're actually investing money in Boeing at this really low price. But where do those shares come from? Because there's already shares on the market, but where do these new shares that the government's going to get actually come from? So let's dive into that. So it's something called dilution, and this is where you actually need to issue more shares so that you can actually take on more cash to put into your bank account and make you more financially sound. And this is one of the ways where you as a stockholder or you as a shareholder of that company can actually be negatively affected. So let's dig into how dilution actually works. Now, all these numbers are super simplified and very hypothetical, but let's assume that you have a $100 million company. And that $100 million company has 100 different shareholders that each own one share. So overall, there's 100 shares that the company actually has. The company is split into 100 different pieces of equal increments. So now let's also assume that you need to get a $20 million bailout, or you need to get $20 million injected into your company. So basically what happens, since all of your pie or all of the shares are already taken by the current investors, you basically have to issue more shares so that that $20 million can now be added into the company. So those 20 million shares, if you can imagine, since each share right now is basically $1 million each, 20 new shares have to be issued. So instead of having 100 total shares, you now have 120 total shares. And so basically what this does to you as a shareholder is it actually reduces the amount of ownership that you have, or your ownership percentage. So where previously you had 1% of the company because you had one share over 100 total shares, now you actually have one share over 120 shares. So the ownership that you have within the company is actually reduced. And this is where, as a shareholder or as a stockholder of a company, you can be negatively affected, because technically with companies, and again, this is a simplified example, but with companies, your shares are equivalent to your voting power. So in this case, because more shares have been added, your voting power actually decreases and the amount that you actually own of a specific company decreases. So that's kind of the oversimplified version of how dilution works. This is just one way of how a bailout can actually work within a company. So in this case, you have a company that's in financial stress. You need to actually issue more shares so that they can take on more money to add to their bank account and make them more sustainable financially. And by taking on more shares, it's actually diluting the current shareholders so that their ownership percentages decrease. But hopefully, even though your ownership percentage is decreasing, the company will actually be able to stay afloat for longer, because now they have more money in the bank. They can actually pay off expenses, pay off creditors, and actually keep employees so that they can avoid massive layoffs. And so in this case, how does the government actually make its money back? So there's two main ways that a government can actually make back its investment or its bailout in you as a company. One is just if the stock price then goes up, the government is able to sell their shares at that higher price, and whatever that difference is between the shares becomes their profit and becomes the money that they're actually being paid back with for actually investing and taking on the risk of putting money into these financially unstable companies. And the second is taxes. And this is where the second cost comes in. So even if you're not a shareholder of a company, you could actually be paying for these bailouts. And that's because to generate more revenue, or to actually recoup the money that they actually invested into a company that needed a bailout, the government is going to rely on you, potentially increasing taxes, which means you are actually paying more out of your paycheck to save these companies. So that is the overall bailout education session. I hope you were able to get a little bit more info on how that works. This is some crazy times we're going through with the coronavirus, and I hope you all stay happy, healthy, and safe. Stay inside, stay self-quarantined, and keep everyone around you safe. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Please don't forget to like. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that alert, comment, let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.